Migration refers to a permanent or semi-permanent change of residence of an individual or a group of people. It is one factor which contributes to population change. A move from a particular location or out-migration is referred to as emigration. A person who leaves a particular location is called an emigrant. A move to another location or in-migration is referred to as immigration. A person who moves to another location is called an immigrant. To understand the reasons for migration, push and pull factors are analyzed. Push factors are events or conditions which influence movement away from a particular location. Famine, natural disasters, and civil unrest are examples of such factors. Pull factors, on the other hand, influence movement towards a particular location. Examples of these include economic opportunities and political freedom. With these reasons are various types of migration which arise because of the nature of the migratory movements. There are two major types of migration, which can be further divided for greater specificity. The first to be discussed is internal migration. Internal migration refers to the temporary or permanent relocation of individuals or groups inside a nation-state. It involves rural-to-rural migration, where persons move from one rural area to another. Rural to urban migration, where movement occurs from a rural area to an urban area. Urban to rural migration, where migration occurs from an urban area to a rural area. Or urban to urban migration, where persons move from one urban area to another. The other major form of migration is international migration. This can be further divided into regional migration, voluntary migration, and forced migration. To make these terms clearer, we take a look at the Caribbean region. The Caribbean, a history of migration. Migration has been the underlying factor for the development of the Caribbean as a place of habitation. The Great Amerindian Migration across the Bering Strait, which took place approximately 12,000 years ago, marked the genesis of the Caribbean population. As years went by, migration continued to shape the Caribbean, leading to the formation of a melting pot of peoples, policies, and cultures. The arrival of the Europeans in 1492 initiated the Caribbean's history of slavery, as the indigenous peoples were captured and forced to work on plantations and other places which the Europeans saw necessary. Countries such as France, Britain, and Spain colonized the Caribbean islands, influencing local cultures. Being unable to cope with the brutal conditions they were placed under, the diseases brought by the Europeans, and the harsh consequences of rebellion, the indigenous Caribbean people were soon wiped out. The Europeans, having no one to depend on, turned to the poorer countries of the world, which had the perceived lower class race, the blacks. The ideal countries for the Europeans were concentrated in the African continent. So, during the 18th and 19th centuries, Africans had to move against their will from their home countries to the Caribbean to work for Europeans. This brings out the concept of forced migration, where an individual changes their place of residence against his or her will. In 1834, after the many riots, rebellions, treaties, and such like, slavery was abolished. The Europeans had to seek cheap labor to continue production, and so they turned to indentured servants who were mainly of Asian descent and to a lesser extent African and European descent. These people opted to come to the Caribbean to work in exchange for free passage and a plot of land. This shows voluntary migration, as movement was as a result of choice. During the 19th century, as Caribbean countries became emancipated, workers moved within the region in search of jobs or better living or working conditions. This is known as regional migration, since movement was not only across national borders, which is international migration, but was also confined to the Caribbean region. It was also seen where many migrants moved to the countries under which they were colonized, therefore showing international migration. Other examples of large-scale international migration took place in the 19th and 20th centuries. In the 1850s, thousands of Caribbean people migrated to Panama to work on the construction of the Panama Canal. The 1970s saw many people migrating from the smaller, less developed island to work in the oil refineries in countries such as the Netherlands and the United States. This period is referred to as the oil boom. Many other migratory movements occurred, most being sparked by job opportunities and the perception of a better life. Other reasons for migration include religion. For example, the Rastafarians moving back to their motherland, Africa. Let's look at the consequences of migration on both the country of origin and the host country. These impacts will be discussed as economic, social, and political, which can be either positive or negative. Consequences of migration on the country of origin. Positive economic impacts. The country of origin can benefit from remittances. Movement of persons from the country reduces the pressure on resources such as food and social services such as healthcare. Negative economic impacts. Economic development can be slowed as the workforce with skills and entrepreneurial talents is lost. There might be increasing dependence on the government for initiatives as the loss of labor reduces the inward investment of private companies. Positive social impacts. Overpopulation can be eased since the younger population leaves, reducing population density and birth rates. The remittances received can be used for the financing of improved health and educational services. Negative social impacts. Family structures may break down as family members separate. The dependency ratio could be increased by the movement of a large percentage of the younger population. There may be increased social cost on the community as support mechanisms for returning retired migrants are not in place. Political impacts. Policies to encourage natural increase and to encourage immigration to counteract outflow can be developed. Requests for international aid can also be made. Consequences of migration on the host country. Positive economic impacts. Less desirable jobs which natives would not take but need filling are many times taken up by migrants. There may be a labor surplus where those with skills and education fuel the economy. The cost of retirement can be transferred to the country of origin. The country can enjoy the benefits of gaining skilled laborers for cheap. Negative economic impacts. In some industries, there is an over-dependency on migrant labor. This may lead to a lack of jobs for people native to the host country. Much of the money earned by migrants is not spent in the host country, but is sent back to the country of origin. More persons being present increase the pressure on the country's resources and services, such as the healthcare system. Positive social consequences. A cosmopolitan society is formed. This facilitates the understanding, acceptance, and tolerance of cultures not indigenous to host countries. New languages and cultures are adapted due to the integration of migrants. As such, there is development of skills of both locals and migrants to international standards. Negative social consequences. In the case of second-generation children, there is a loss in certain aspects of cultural identity due to adapting of the culture of the host country. Due to an influx of immigrants in specific areas, there is the occurrence of segregation. Political impacts. Different ethnic groups and minorities may face discrimination within the host country. This can eventually lead to civil unrest and extremism due to the disgruntled majorities. Immigration controls may have to be revisited in order to limit the amount of migration which occurs. Let us now look at migration policies. Migration policies are policies of states which deal with the transit of persons crossing its borders, but they especially pertain to persons who intend to work and remain within the country. Migration policies can influence both emigration and immigration. Immigration policies usually involve migration and migrant integration into society. Immigration policies encourage the return of citizens to their respective countries. Policies on diasporic matters and movement of citizens due to hazards. Examples of migration policies include policies for skilled migration, refugees and asylum, integration, development aid or cooperation, travel with no border and mobility, irregular and undocumented migrants, to name a few. However, policies can range from free migration to allowing no migration at all. Immigration policies generally allow for free movement of immigrants from one country to another. It also contains specific features which make the migration process easy. For example, settlement programs which make the process of settling in host countries less cumbersome. Language programs in which immigrants are taught the language of the host country, and introduction programs where there is assistance to immigrants in the process of transitioning from immigration to the labor market and social integration. This type of program is seen in Germany and also in Canada. During the 19th century, the movement of individuals and groups to Canada was largely unrestricted, with the exclusion of criminals, paupers, the diseased, and the destitute. During the 1970s, immigration and population policies were officially reviewed, and a green paper on immigration policy was implemented. They include the promotion of Canada's demographic, economic, social, and cultural goals, family reunion, non-discrimination, the fulfillment of Canada's international obligations in relation to refugees, and cooperation among all levels of government, as well as with the voluntary sector, in promoting the adaptation of newcomers to Canadian society. During the 1980s, immigration policy makers instituted a program to encourage businessmen and entrepreneurs to immigrate to Canada, bringing their managerial skills and capital so as to create additional employment opportunities, and as a result, many immigrants have brought substantial capital and jobs to Canada in the past 15 years. There is also the case of restriction of immigration through migration policies. Although migration is a powerful development tool, this is done in an attempt to control the population of a country. It also increases the transparency and controllability of migration flows. Measures of restricting immigration includes the implementation of labor quota, changes to the results or the rules of registration and migration control, economic needs, tests for employing migrants, and the limitation of the right to family reunion. In developed countries, this is seen as a measure of avoidance of poverty. Migration policies are seen on a regional scale, as in the case of Barbados. This policy attempts to restrict immigration. It was implemented with the intention to reduce the number of migrants coming to Barbados and to make it more difficult for illegal immigrants to gain residence status by the length of time spent in this island. It is also seen in the case of Australia with the Immigration Restriction Act of 1901. This act aimed to limit immigration to Australia and provided for illegal immigrants to be deported. As a result, immigration officers were allowed to prevent individuals from entering Australia. There was also the introduction of a dictation test, which allowed immigration officers to evaluate applicants on the basis of language skills.